Hello, and thanks for joining us for this episode of Into the Killing. Do you know of any cold cases that were eventually solved? Then please visit our website, Criminally Listed, then go to the Suggest a Case page to recommend it to us. On that same page, you can suggest cases for Criminally Listed and Paranormally Listed. For this week's episode, we're going back to September 1988. On September 2nd, 1988, the benefit concert tour, Human Rights Now, launched in Wembley Stadium in London, England. The 20-city tour featured Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, Sting, Peter Gabriel, Tracy Chapman, and Houston Dorr. The tour lasted 6 weeks and they visited 15 countries. The tour was to raise awareness of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which had been adopted 40 years earlier, and Amnesty International's work. More than 1 million people attended the concerts. On September 9th, 1988, the most intense hurricane on record in the Atlantic Basin up to that point started forming. Hurricane Gilbert eventually became a Category 5 storm, which is the most intense type of wind. Wind speeds reach 185 miles per hour. The storm battered the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. Mexico and Jamaica were particularly hard hit by the hurricane. In total, 318 people were killed. 202 of those people were in Mexico and 45 were in Jamaica. It caused $2.98 billion in damages, accounting for inflation that is $7.9 billion in 2024. On September 17, 1988, the Summer Olympics opened in Seoul, South Korea. There were many highlights, but for people in North America, 2 memorable things happened at those games. On September 19th, American diver Greg Louganis smacked the back of his head on a springboard while diving in the 3-meter preliminary competition. This cut his head and he bled in the pool. At the time, Louganis was keeping a secret. He had tested HIV positive months earlier. Louganis was worried that the other competitors who went into the water and the doctors who treated him would contract the disease. However, no one did. The pool water diluted the blood and chlorine killed the HIV. The doctors used proper safety precautions. Louganis suffered a concussion but continued to compete. He ended up winning gold in the 3-meter springboard and 10-meter platform competitions. Louganis publicly revealed he was gay and HIV positive 8 years later in 1995. Another major story from the 1988 Summer Olympics involved Canadian sprinter Ben Johnson. On September 24th, Johnson was competing in the 100-meter dash. He finished first in just 9.79 seconds. It was a new world record. Johnson had set the previous record of 9.83 a year earlier at the World Championship in Rome. Johnson was the first man to run the race under 9.9 seconds and 9.8 seconds. Johnson was awarded the gold medal, but then 3 days after the race, he was stripped of the medal because of traces of anabolic steroids were found in his urine. The gold medal was awarded to the man who came in second, American Carl Lewis. 3 banned substances were also found in his urine: pseudoephedrine, ephedrine, and phenylpropylamine. However, these were uppers and not steroids. Nevertheless, they were banned substances. Lewis claimed that they were in his system because he had taken the wrong cold medication, so he was cleared of any wrongdoing. After Ben Johnson was stripped of his gold medal, he then admitted to using steroids in Rome. That gold medal was stripped from him as well. Both of his world records were disqualified. Ben Johnson's steroid use is considered one of the biggest scandals in modern Olympic history. On September 16, 1988, the number 1 song was Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses. The number 1 movie was the 4th film in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, The Dream Master. In September 1988, 19-year-old Pamela Pitts lived in Prescot, Arizona. Prescot is famous for being a former frontier and silver mining town. 2 of the most famous residents were major figures in the American Western frontier, Doug Holliday and Virgil Earp. Eventually, the town became a tourist attraction. It's also home to the Prescot Frontier Days, Inc., which bills itself as the world's oldest rodeo. In 1988, it celebrated its 100th year in operation. In September 1988, 19-year-old Pamela Pitts lived in Prescot with 2 of her housemates, Shelley Norgard, and Jeremy Robinson. Pamela worked as a secretary at a wholesale sandwich company. She had grown up in the city, and she was the oldest of 4 children. She was considered outgoing and friendly. In her spare time, she liked to talk on her CB radio. She had a boyfriend, Bobby Kitchener. On Saturday, September 17th, 1988, Shelley Norgard, one of Pamela's roommates, called Pamela's father, Paul Pitts, and asked if he had seen or heard from Pamela. He said he last talked to her at dinner 2 nights before. Shelley told Paul she went out last night and didn't return home. Initially, Paul wasn't worried because 19-year-old Pamela was known to be a free spirit. Paul thought she was probably crashing at a friend's home. So he waited until Monday, September 19th, when Pamela was scheduled to work. Paul called her workplace and her boss said she hadn't shown up or called. This was very out of character for Pamela. So Paul went to the police and reported her missing. The police went to Pamela's house and found Pamela's purse, identification, and medication in the house. Her car was also parked outside the home. Paul was bothered when he learned this. Had he known she was missing but her car and belongings were at home, he would have called the police sooner. On September 29th, 1988, less than 2 weeks after Pamela went missing, a couple was target shooting in the Prescot National Forest. They were in a gravel pit known as Gordos Pit. It's about 7 miles northwest of the city. It was a popular place for teenagers to party and drink alcohol. It was also the scene of a murder that happened 2 years earlier. Early on the morning of May 17, 1986, 21-year-old college student Blake White was drinking at a gathering. White was from British Columbia, Canada, and was in Prescott taking a gunsmithing class. Later that day, he was going to receive his diploma. He got into an argument with 21-year-old construction worker Clifford Cox Jr. Cox claimed that White had pulled a gun on him, so he pulled out a knife and stabbed White in the neck. In September 1986, Cox pleaded guilty to manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. On September 29, 1988, the 2 people who were doing target shooting came across a burned pile of trash and saw something unusual on top of it. They realized it was a badly burned human body. They called the police. The body was burned beyond recognition. Using dental records, they determined it was the body of 19-year-old Pamela Pitts. Due to the state of the body, the medical examiner could not determine the cause of death. The medical examiner found dead fly larvae that had been killed because of the heat. This led him to believe that Pamela had been killed earlier and that her body was stored elsewhere. Then her body was dumped on the garbage pile and set on fire. One of the first suspects was Pamela's boyfriend, Bobby Kitchener. He said he was with Pamela earlier in the night. He went to work at about 9:30. When he left, Pamela was with friends. She said she was going home and was not planning on doing anything that night. He said he had no idea what happened to her. The police were able to confirm his alibi. The police talked to Pamela's roommates, Shelley Norgard and Jeremy Robinson. Shelley told the police that she and Pamela met through mutual friends and moved in together in June 1988, about 3 months before the murder. They realized they couldn't afford the rent, so Jeremy moved in with them. But Pamela was still having a problem paying the rent. Shelley said that on the night Pamela was murdered, she told her she was going to move out. Pamela had spoken to her father, Paul, about her living situation. She also told him she was having problems paying the rent and was considering moving back home. Shelley admitted to the police that she was a bit angry with Pamela. To pay the rent, they had a joint bank account. Shelley said she put her share of the rent in the account and Pamela had withdrawn the money but didn't pay the rent. Shelley was asked about her whereabouts on the night of the murder. She said that she and her boyfriend, Raymond Clerks, went to a friend's home and watched movies until 3 a.m. Then they went back to his home. But she couldn't sleep, so she got into her car and drove around until 7 a.m. She said she often had problems sleeping, and when she did, she drove around aimlessly. Raymond was questioned, and he confirmed that they had watched movies at their friend's home. But he said they went home around 11:30 p.m. He was told that Pamela said that they went home around 3 a.m. Raymond said that was possible. He couldn't remember exactly what they did that night because it happened weeks earlier. Raymond was given a polygraph exam and he passed. So the police believe that Shelley had nothing to do with the murder. Pamela's other roommate, Jeremy Robinson, said he was at a football game and then hung out with friends. The police confirmed his alibi. The police interviewed several people who said they saw Pamela at a party at Gordos Pit on the night she went missing. Several people made a shocking claim. They said that Pamela had been killed in a satanic ritual. One young man claimed that his friend had bragged about killing Pamela that night. He did it in a ritual as a sacrifice to Satan. He said he had stabbed her in the neck with an ice pick and then set her on fire. The man he accused of killing Pamela was questioned. He adamantly denied having anything to do with the murder. The police investigated the satanic ritual angle, but it did not lead anywhere. However, this did not kill the rumors that Pamela was murdered in a satanic ritual. Many people in the town believe this is what happened. Another suspect emerged during the police's interviews. It was a young woman named Melinda Perry who had a reputation for fighting. One person said that Melinda beat up Pamela at the party. The police thought that Melinda might have decided to finish Pamela off later that night. Melinda was questioned, and she said she didn't harm Pamela. She swore she wasn't even at the party that night. The police were not convinced. So the district attorney scheduled an investigative grand jury where Melinda Perry and the people who claimed she beat up Pamela that night would have to testify under oath. The grand jury session was held in August 1989. Melinda maintained she wasn't at the party at Gordos Pit and she did not hurt Pamela. She also had an alibi. She was hanging out with a local band who played at a motel. 4 months later, Melinda was arrested. The district attorney believed that Melinda lied under oath, so she was charged with 3 counts of perjury. But in October 1990, the charges were dropped. After that, Melinda Perry moved out of the state. Then the case went cold. On May 25, 1991, nearly 3 years after the murder, some students were cave exploring outside of Prescot. In a vertical mineshaft, they found the decomposing body of a man. He was wrapped up in the liner of a waterbed mattress. The body was identified as 25-year-old Raymond Clerks. Raymond was the boyfriend of Pamela's roommate, Shelley. Based on their investigation, they determined that Raymond was probably killed around May 10, 1991, about 2 weeks before his body was found. At the time, Raymond had been living with Shelley. He had recently gotten his pilot's license and was looking for a job in California. He told his family he was planning on moving there and he was not going to be bringing Shelley with him. But then Raymond mysteriously fell out of contact with his family. His family members called Shelley several times and she said he was either busy or out of town. When Raymond didn't show up for a family wedding, his family reported him missing. The police quickly connected the missing persons report to the body. After the police confirmed it was Raymond's body, they went to the home he shared with Shelley. Inside, they found specks of blood. They examined Shelley's car, and there was a strong smell of death. In the trunk was blood. The blood was tested for type, and it was the same blood as Raymond's. Under the front seat was a revolver, which was the same caliber used to kill Raymond. They learned that days before the body was found, Shelley had borrowed a pickup truck from a friend. The police seized the truck and compared the tire treads to the tire tracks found near the mouth of the mine. It was a match. In the mine shaft, the police found a flashlight. It had one of Shelley's fingerprints on it. On June 4th, 1991, Shelley Norgard was arrested for murder. After she was arrested, she denied killing her boyfriend. But 2 years later, in June 1993, she pleaded guilty. She said she was angry with Raymond because he was going to leave her and take their dogs. She said on the night he was murdered, they were watching planes fly overhead. Raymond was lying on top of the car. She got the gun from the floor of the car and shot him in the head. The police do not believe that this is how the murder happened. Because of the blood splatter found in their home, they think Raymond was murdered there. Then she got his body into the trunk of her car, where it stayed for about 2 weeks. They do not know if she drove it or kept it parked during those 2 weeks. She then borrowed a pickup truck with 4-wheel drive. She got his body into it, then drove the body out to the mine shaft where she dumped it. They suspected that someone helped her move the body, but no one else was arrested in connection with Raymond's murder. Shelley was sentenced to 20 years without the chance of parole. After the discovery of Raymond's body, the police thought that Shelley might have killed her former roommate, 19-year-old Pamela Pitts. There were several strong similarities between the murders of Raymond and Pamela. Both had lived with Shelley. After they were killed, their bodies were hidden and then dumped outside the city limits. Perhaps the most striking similarity was that both Pamela and Raymond were killed after they told Shelley they were going to move out. The police tried to connect Shelley to Pamela's murder. They appealed to the public, offering immunity to anyone who might have been involved in the murder if they had information about the murder. But no one came forward. The police could not find any evidence that connected Shelley to Pamela's murder, so the case went cold again. Then we come to 2011, 23 years after Pamela Pitts' murder. A lot had changed in that time. Popular movies in 1988 were The Naked Gun, From the Files of the Police Squad, Grave of the Fireflies, and Bloodsport. In 2011, Drive, The Cabin in the Woods, and Bridesmaids were all released. In 1988, major video game releases were John Madden Football, Super Mario Bros. 3, and Mega Man 2. Super Mario 3D Land, The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, and LA Noire were all released in 2011. Companies established in 1988 were Outback Steakhouse, Melissa & Doug, and XM Satellite Radio. In 2011, major companies that were started include Wahlburgers, Poshmark, and Impossible Foods. In early 2011, a full-time investigator was assigned to Pamela Pitts' murder. The prime suspect, Shelley Norgard, was scheduled to be released from prison that spring. In February 2011, Shelley was interviewed in prison by the police about Pamela's murder. She maintained she had nothing to do with the murder. So Shelley was released in May 2011. After Shelley was released, she got married, changed her last name to Harmon, and settled near Carson City, Nevada. Over the next 6 years, the cold case detective investigated the murder. He strongly believed that Shelley was the killer. At the time, Shelley was angry with Pamela because she was going to move out and she had stolen money from her. No one else had a motive to kill Shelley. the recording of the initial interview with Shelley had been saved. The detectives had pressed her if she had killed Pamela. Shelley got upset and started crying, so they stopped the interview. The cold case detective also found interviews with Shelley and Pamela's friends. Some of them said that on the night of the murder, Shelley had been driving around looking for Pamela. She told several people that if she found Pamela, she would kill her. Before Pamela was killed, Shelley told several people that she knew how to get away with murder. She said you have to make sure the victim goes missing for a while. Then you either burn the body or dump it down a mine shaft. Since Pamela went missing and then was burned, the police questioned her again. Shelley admitted to saying that the best way to destroy evidence would be to burn the body, but she said she was talking theoretically. She was adamant that she did not kill her roommate. The police searched the home they shared and found no evidence that Shelley killed her. The cold case detective believed that this was all very promising, but none of it proved that Shelley killed Pamela. Then he was reviewing a recording of a phone call Shelley made to her father from prison. It was shortly after she was questioned about Pamela's murder. She told her father that she had been questioned. He told her that he was worried that as soon as she walked out of prison, she would be arrested. He said he had always wondered what happened that night because she never told him. Shelley said, quote, "I had a moment. I had a huge moment," unquote. Her father then went silent. The cold case investigator took this as an acknowledgement that she committed the murder. On June 4, 2017, 50-year-old Shelley Norgard was arrested for the murder of Pamela Pitts. She was held in jail while she awaited trial. It turned out to be a long legal battle. The defense argued that the jury should not be told about Raymond Clerks' murder because it would prejudice them against Shelley. The prosecution argued that the two murders had a lot of similarities. Both had lived with Shelley, she was angry with both of them when they were killed, and both bodies were stored before they were dumped in remote areas. The judge ultimately ruled in favor of the defense, so the prosecution wouldn't be able to tell the jury that Shelley was a convicted killer. This was a big blow to the prosecution's case, which was already thin. They did not have a single piece of physical evidence. The defense could even argue that Pamela wasn't even murdered. The medical examiner could not determine the cause of death. So the defense could have argued something like Pamela had died of a drug overdose and then someone set her body on fire. Pamela Pitts' family discussed the problem. If Shelley went to trial and the prosecution couldn't convince all 12 jury members that she was guilty, they would never know what happened to Pamela. They learned that Shelley was willing to plead guilty, but she did not want to spend any more time in prison. Pamela's family was told, with their approval, they would offer Shelley a plea deal. If Shelley pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and confessed, she would be credited with time served for Raymond Clerks' murder and the time she spent awaiting trial. In March 2021, Shelley agreed to the plea deal. Shelley explained she was angry with Pamela because their shared checking account was overdrawn. Also, she was mad that Shelley was going to move out. Without her, she couldn't afford rent and had nowhere else to go. When her parents got divorced, her mother took off. Her father was very strict, and she felt that moving back in with him was not an option. Shelley said on the night of the murder she went looking for Pamela and knew that she sometimes hung out at Gordos Pit. She found her there and confronted her. She said she punched her in the face and Pamela fell to the ground. She then climbed on top of her. She kept punching her until Pamela stopped breathing. Shelley said she heard people nearby, so she left. That was all she said about the murder. Both Shelley's family and the police were disappointed by the confession. Notably, Shelley didn't explain what she did with the body afterward because technically that wasn't part of the plea deal. She just had to talk about the murder, not what she did to the body. So she never took responsibility for desecrating the body. In a bizarre end to the case, after Shelley Norgard confessed to murdering her roommate 33 years earlier, she was freed from prison and allowed to go home. Pamela's father, Paul Pitts, told the TV show, Snapped, that Shelley's husband should sleep with one eye open. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Once again, if you know of any cases to suggest for Into the Killing, Criminally Listed, or Paranormally Listed, please visit our website, criminallylisted.com. Thanks again for listening. Please take care of yourself and stay safe.